Thank you very much, Sister Maria. My name is Ratib. I'll be your speaker today. It's my pleasure to speak to you today about Islam and about Muslims. I'd like to say that it is an honor to have visitors in our mosque. It always is. Many a times, I've had the privilege of hosting many non-Muslims who come to mosque. And many a times, one of the first questions they ask is that they want to know that they want to make sure that they're not doing anything to offend Muslims when they walk into the mosque. Like, may I say something that would offend Muslims, or the way I'm dressed, or anything like that? And I don't blame you. Many people who are not Muslims, it might be their first time coming to a mosque, or maybe the only other mosque they've ever been to is in Cairo or Istanbul on vacation in a or in Spain in a museum mosque. In other words, it's not being used as a mosque, it's really an ancient mosque. But they haven't had the real experience, so we wanted to just welcome those who are not Muslim to the mosque, and we wanted to tell you that there's really nothing you can do to really offend a Muslim. In fact, the Muslims that are here right now, including myself, are very, very happy to have non-Muslims in the mosque. The story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that when Muhammad, peace be upon him, was teaching, some Bedouin came in and he needed to use the bathroom, so he relieved himself in the corner of the mosque. Of course, it's a worship place, and some Muslims were about to jump him, but the Prophet Muhammad stopped them and said, nobody touch him, and he asked them to clean up the area where he used the bathroom, and he asked a few others to come and teach him the proper ethics. That's because they were Bedouin and slightly on the nomadic, dirty side, not city dwellers or anything like that. That and many, many other stories of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, teach us how much we welcome those who are not Muslim into the mosque, and there's really not much you can do about that. So you could be rest assured of that right now. The next thing I wanted to tell you is there's not any question you can ask that would offend us, because we already know that your image or your understanding, if you're not a Muslim, and in our audience tonight, your image or what you know about Islam is by two areas: the media, what you see Muslims doing in the news or so on, and the effort or lack of effort of Muslims on our part to teach people, the general public, about what Islam is about. So if we Muslims have not done a good enough job as a Muslim community to show the non-Muslims about what Islam is about, we don't blame you as a non-Muslim for thinking that all Muslims are like this, fill in the blank of whatever this is. That's because Muslims have not done a good enough job. And we have not. We admit as Muslims, we are still striving, we're working hard, and we're hoping to do a better job of conveying what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Because if we Muslims, if more of us had done a good enough job, there wouldn't be as many negative stereotypes of Muslims. Because there are a lot of Muslims who give us a bad image, and those who don't give a bad image, hopefully the ones who are striving and working hard, they need to convey it out to the public more. This open house is part of that effort. That's why we welcome you here today. Today I wanted to speak to you about Islam, and first I'd like to start off with just a couple terminology. These are a few words that Muslims throw around and they assume that everybody knows what they mean. Like, mashallah, Imad here, he knows 4 jizit from the Quran, right? Everybody knows what a jizit is from the Quran. A jizit, also known as a para in Pakistan, in Urdu, is a section of the Quran, an equal section. There's 30, it's split up into 30 sections. If you study a little more about the Quran, you'll learn that it has 114 chapters in the Quran, known as surah, and more than 6,000 verses, and it's the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad. We'll tell you about that a little later, or we'll talk about it if anybody's interested in it. Which brings me up to the next point. If there's anything that I say that are not clear about, maybe I might assume you know something. I might assume that everybody knows whatever I'm talking about. If there's anything you don't understand, you just raise your hand and ask. This is an open area and a welcoming area and a judgment-free zone. So you just raise your hand and you ask. It would be my pleasure to explain it and to go into further details. That's the hardship of giving a talk about Islam. We know so much information, and there's so much, 1,400 years of history. It is going to be very hard to encapsulate it in one evening. I'm going to try my best, and I ask Allah, the one God Almighty, to help out with that and work with me on that by giving me feedback, and I'm sure we'll have a great evening, and hopefully we'll also top off the great evening with a good meal. which a lot of Muslims are looking forward to because I haven't eaten since 4 a.m. But we're more than halfway through the month of Ramadan, so we're hanging in there. We'll make it, inshallah. God willing. Inshallah means God willing. We'll make it, and so will all the other Muslims make it, God willing. So I mentioned real quick about the jizr, the word Quran, which is the Muslim holy book. The word Allah, which you might hear over and over, which means the one God. You might think Allah, some Muslims mistranslate, or they mistranslate, they don't completely translate the word Allah. They say it as God, G, with a capital G, and that is not the complete meaning, because Allah in Arabic is ilah, which means, correction. God in Arabic is ilah, which means God with a small g. Allah starts with the al, which in English means the, and that is the one God. That's why Allah cannot be plural. It's just the one God. And then there's Muhammad, who's the messenger of God, the final messenger of Allah, and the Quran, which we mentioned real quick, and a lot of other popular words like Allahu Akbar, which is just simply God is the greatest. If you observe us, or if you hang around to observe us in our sunset, fourth prayer today, which happens at sunset at around 9 p.m., you will see that between our motions in prayer, we say the word Allahu Akbar. Allah, of course, many a times people are not Muslim. The only time they hear Allahu Akbar is on the news. When some Muslim group is about to yell it because they're about to go do something or something like that, as though it's a war cry or a cry for arms or something like that. It is not. What it is just saying God is the greatest, an acknowledgement that the most superior being or the most superior entity, the one we worship, is the one God and nobody else. His rules above anybody else's. Another popular word is the word jihad, which simply means struggle in Arabic. Jihad, we say fi sabilillah, which means for the sake of God. That is mistranslated in English as holy war. Holy war in Arabic is translated as harb muqaddasa, which is holy war, 2 words, not 1 word, jihad. And harb muqaddasa, which is a war where somebody holds a sword above somebody else's neck, they need to convert or get killed, that is against the religion of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad taught against that and did not allow that to happen. And thank God that never in the history of Islam was there a campaign, a crusade with a small c, an effort to convince people to convert to Islam by the sword. Because there's a clear verse in the Quran which says nobody can be forced in religion, no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fi din. Sometimes I might throw out the verse in Arabic just in case the Muslim audience here might wonder which verse I'm talking about. Which also reminds me, Muslims are also welcomed in this audience. I welcomed all the non-Muslims, but I didn't say anything about the Muslims in the audience. You might be here and you might be thinking, oh, I know all this information. This is all easy, and they taught me this in our weekend school or something like that. Well, you could sit there and you can enjoy listening about Islam, and you can also learn maybe some skills about how to speak to non-Muslims about the religion of Islam. One of them is not to use words, throwing out words which you assume that they already mean. You'll notice in my speech, I don't assume anybody knows anything. So even when I say the word Muhammad, which is the Prophet Muhammad's name, for Muslims, right away we say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And you might hear a Muslim say that, like Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which means peace be upon him. But for people who aren't Muslim, they have no idea what you're saying. So you need to pay attention to that if you're a Muslim, about speaking to non-Muslims. Back to what we were talking about, the one God and the worship of one God. Our religion of Islam is not a new religion. It is not a new religion. It is a continuation of the same religion that Prophet Abraham taught, and Moses, Jesus, and all the other prophets before them taught. Those prophets also taught Islam, we believe, but Islam with a small I. And they were Muslims with a small m. We Muslims are Muslims with a capital M, which means we are followers of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Why the distinction, you might ask? It has to do with the word Islam and what it means. Islam means to submit to the one God. That's what Islam means. And it also comes from another root, salam, which means peace. Peace through submission. So that's what the word Islam means. And a Muslim is one who submits to God. That is why we believe the followers of Jesus and Moses and all the prophets were submitters, those who believed in one God. Then after the prophet died, either their teachings were forgotten, or some people distorted the teachings, And God Almighty decided to send prophet after prophet, so he can teach the people about worshiping the one God and following that messenger, until God, in his ultimate wisdom, decided to send the final messenger of our God, which is Muhammad, peace be upon him. As I said, if there are any questions, you're welcome to ask. I'll be speaking for a little, and Ms. Dua Fahmi will also be speaking in a little about Ramadan. And after, we're going to open up to question and answers. But if there's any questions while I'm speaking about what I'm saying, you're welcome to ask me. Most welcome. No hardship in that. Nothing will stop. Nothing that ruins the program or stops the program. In fact, it enriches our program, and that's why we're encouraging. So I was telling you real quickly about the beliefs, and I mentioned to you about the beliefs. Why? Let me tell you a little about the 6 required beliefs in Islam. Why are these important? They're important for a Muslim. They're important for a Muslim because a Muslim needs to believe in all 6 required beliefs. If a Muslim doesn't believe in one of them, they disqualify themselves as a Muslim. They're just not Muslim. That's because belief is much more important to us than action. Action is important. That means doing the things. That's because we show God and we show ourselves that we do believe by doing the actions. In other words, not doing any actions, not praying, not helping your neighbor, not avoiding bad things like alcohol and other things. Not doing those one cannot say that I'm a believer in the one God. Because if you love God, you would follow the rules of God. Just simple logic like that. But belief is very important for a Muslim. And it's also good for people who are not Muslim to hear about. Because once you hear about it, you might think back and say, hey, I always thought myself so different than Muslims. Now that I hear what they believe in, they're not that different. They pretty much believe it. I've had people who aren't Muslim come up after the discussion and say, everything that you talked about, these 6 required beliefs, I already believe in. And I feel like telling them, you know what? Maybe you're Muslim and you don't even know it. Which is okay too. You don't have to know it. We don't have a badge, we don't have a star, we don't have a flag. We don't have anything where you have to sign up to be a Muslim, sign out to be non-Muslim. Any day you want. You want to come to the mosque and pray? You're welcome to come to the mosque, to this mosque, and every mosque to pray. Whether you're a Muslim or you're not a Muslim. You just come and quietly pray, and if you want to pray to the one God, you're welcome to come to this mosque. We don't have any criteria, nor do we excommunicate, which means kick out anybody. This mosque is welcome to anybody, who's not disruptive. Things like that, of course. Doesn't mean absolutely anybody. It means anybody who just wants to come pray and pray like everybody else in a civilized, respectful manner, you're most welcome to. So let me tell you about the 6 required beliefs. The first one is to believe in the one God, without exception. Muslims cannot believe that God had a son or a father or a brother or a weakness or multiple gods or God of this and God of that. It's just one God. Pretty basic, simple, true monotheism, absolute monotheism. What they call in some books unadulterated monotheism, which means it's just basic to the core. One God, and there's a verse in the Quran that says, "Qul Huwallahu ahad," say there's only one God, so on. So the next one is to believe in the angels of God. We are required to believe in the angels that God tells us about in the Quran. The most popular one is the Archangel Gabriel. He's the same angel who came to Jesus, he came to Moses, and he also came to Muhammad with the same message to believe in one God and follow the messenger of God. The slight difference that Muslims believe in is regarding the devil. We do not believe the devil is a fallen angel. We believe that the devil is a creation of God, created from fire, who decided to disobey God. There's Muslim, the believing devils and not believing correction. They're called jinn, J-I-N-N. There's believing jinn and disbelieving jinn, and we can talk about that more if anybody's interested. You can ask me more. The next one is to believe in the books of God. Muslims are required to believe in the books of God. And those books of God are the 4 more popular ones. And I'll answer your question in just a second. Let me finish up this sentence about the books of God. And they are the Gospel, the Torah, the Zabur of the Prophet David, and the final book of God, Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Quran, the final book of God. Some people who are not Muslim might wonder, how are you required to believe in the Old Testament and you don't follow the Old Testament? That's because we believe in the original gospel that was sent down to Jesus, peace be upon him. In our opinion, or in the Muslim point of view, that whole book is not available in its entirety as given to Jesus from A to Z, beginning to end. As a result of that, God sent down the final book, the Quran, and in the Quran there is a self-proclaiming promise of self-preservation for the Quran. God tells us he will preserve the Quran until the day of judgment. There's a question back there that I missed, Doctor. Okay. Well, if you think of the question, we'll come back to it. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Number 3 is told about the devil.
Yes.
Okay. And you say not a fallen angel.
Yes.
How do you say it?
Is a jinn, Jinn, a creation from God of fire?
Okay, so a creation from God of fire.
Yes.
All right. Because it kind of sounds like a fallen angel.
It's not. And I'll tell you why. Our definition of an angel is a creation of God that cannot disobey God. Much like nature. God has created the birds, and they can't disobey God. They're just birds. They're not going to do anything else but be birds. Same as the angels. They were created by God to serve God, and they cannot disobey God. They had no will. Nor will they go to heaven or hell on the day of judgment. Yet the jinn and humans were created were created in the beginning of time, and they have a will. They can choose whether to be good or evil. There's a lot more we can talk about this. There really is. But if you'll just allow me to continue on, only because I would like Miss Dua Fahmi to speak her part, Miss Dua, and because I don't want to take over her part, and of course we just like to continue on with the program, if that's no problem. But I'd like to take, if you want, we can talk about that more in the question and answer session. I'm so glad you asked. So we talked about believing in one God, believing in the books of God. We talked about believing in the angels of God. The next one would be the messengers of God. We're required to believe in all the messengers of God. 25 of them are mentioned in the Quran. Many of them you would already know them. Jonah, Abraham, Isaac, and the final messenger of God, Muhammad, peace be upon him. We are required to believe in all of them, and we place the prophet Isa alayhi salam, who is in English Jesus, on a high pedestal just like all the other prophets of God. Of course, we don't place him higher than that. In other words, we don't think of Jesus as divine, nor do we think of him as the Son of God. We believe that Jesus did not teach that. That's our point of view. That's not to say that it's wrong and you need to change your mind. That's just to tell you our point of view, the Muslim point of view, the way God explained it to us, is that people loved Jesus so much that they elevated his status from a prophet of God to a divine Son of God. And for us as Muslims, it would be wrong to degrade someone, to say Jesus is a nothing. That would be an insult. It's also wrong to elevate someone. So if you ever hear from a Muslim, I don't know where you hear this, but if you ever hear from a Muslim that Muhammad is God, then that is wrong. And we would never accept that. And the reason we would never accept that is that's because elevating him higher than the status. The next one is to believe in the day of judgment. We're required to believe that there will be a day when God will resurrect all. He will create us again anew, just like he was able to create us the first time, so we can face judgment. And the last one is destiny, as ordained by God. Allah controls destiny. He knows when you're going to be born, when you're going to die, and there's nothing outside of the knowledge of the one God. Of course, this last one, destiny, gets philosophical, so that's another one we can talk about for a long time, even longer than what jinn or the devil is about. And it requires open-mindedness and a vast understanding, and there are still Muslim scholars who debate destiny and its understanding. I talked to you real quick about the 6 beliefs in Islam, and I also wanted to mention to you the 5 pillars of Islam. The reason we're going to mention the 5 pillars is most of them have to do with action. And I'm going to go over them briefly because you can pretty much read about them pretty much anywhere. And I'd like Mr. Ab to speak right after me. In other words, instead of me taking, I would hate to take over. The 5 pillars of Islam are pretty basic and straightforward. The first one is to believe in the one God. You might find that this is repetition. Repetition, in other words, we already said believe in one God, but that's to emphasize its importance. The rest of the pillars have to do with action. The first one has to do with the belief in one God. A core concept. Without it, everything else is really null to us as Muslims. The second one is prayer. Muslims pray 5 times a day. This is not just, we don't pray only 5 times a day. Some other people say, well, I pray all the time, all day. Yes, Muslims pray all the time, all day. Before we eat, we say a prayer. But we call that a supplication. It is not an organized prayer. You could say it in Arabic or English. You could say it any way you want. Best to say it the way the Prophet Muhammad taught us to say it, and in Arabic. But you could say it anyway, or grace before you eat, or before you go to sleep. When I'm talking about the 5 daily prayers, which you'll be able to watch there, where we face Mecca, and we wash up ablution before, and we raise our hands, and we say Allahu Akbar, and we do our certain number of bow downs, up and down, facing towards Mecca. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. Every Muslim does it. Every Muslim should do it, and it's about 5 times a day, and I can tell you about that a little more. The next one is fasting. Muslims fast during the month of Ramadan. This is the month that we're in right now. We're a little past the middle of Ramadan. Ramadan started on July 8 or 9, and it will be ending around August 8 or 9 or so, like that. It's 29, 30 to 30 days of staying away from food, drink, and lawful sexual relation with your wife from pre-dawn until sunset. The last one, which is a very interesting one, is the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. And that's where God requires us to go, to try our best to go. Once in a lifetime, to do the pilgrimage, at least once in a lifetime, the pilgrimage to Mecca. It's required on those who are in good health and can travel and have the money and able to do it in a safe means. They're past the age of puberty. They're required to put the effort to go to Mecca, the holy city, to do that pilgrimage. Annually, they say more than 3.5 million people do the pilgrimage. It didn't used to be that much, but now there's airplanes and easier transportation. And the pilgrimage to Mecca is an awe-inspiring story. If you have somebody at your table who's done the pilgrimage to Mecca, you can ask him. And the pilgrimage to Mecca got popular after 91, the movie Malcolm X, where Malcolm X did the pilgrimage to Mecca. And when he came back, he realized, wait a minute, you know, white people, black people, they're the same. We're all the children of God. And he taught a much more loving, correct version of Islam, which people know Malcolm X for. So I spoke to you about the 6 required beliefs in God and the 5 pillars of Islam. Hopefully I gave you a quick, encapsulated understanding of the Islamic religion. I wanted to thank you all for having me bring this to your attention and talk about it with you. I'd like Ms. Duat to come up and speak next a little more about Ramadan, the month of fasting, and the topic that she'd like to talk about. And then her and I will share the stage so we can field any questions that might have come up or anything that you'd like to discuss any further. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair. May God bless you.
Thank you, Brother Ratib. Just quickly, I forgot to say in the beginning, if you look at your table, there are index cards and pens. If you have any questions and are not able to ask and you don't want it to kind of just shift away from your brain, write it down. And we have volunteers that will walk around and collect these cards. They will be answered, any questions you have. If you have a private question that you want to ask on the side, I'm sure our speaker and our imam will be more than happy to answer any of your questions after the event. Also, just to kind of give everybody an overview, at about 8:40 we will be breaking, and we will be observing the breaking of fast, and we will be observing also the prayer. We will kind of go in through that door. The only thing that we ask is everybody, because this is a praying area, we're going to have shoe shelves over there, that your shoes have to be off when you enter. If you do not wish to do or participate in this experience, there are nobody's forced to. You're more than welcome to sit here and somebody will be with you. And then dinner will be served at about 9:15. Any questions? I know this event is really rushed and I apologize. Hopefully in the near future we'll have more time. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. She is a science teacher by profession, currently teaching at Crescent Academy International in Canton, Michigan. She leads a youth group once a week where she teaches the Muslim creed and spiritual approach towards our modern day world. She also organizes large lectures with highly qualified Muslim scholars via Al-Maghrib Institute in an effort to equip brothers and sisters with tools, confidence, and resources required to be the inspiring and active leaders of our community. Without further ado, please help me welcome Dua Fahmi.
Assalamu alaikum, or hello. I'm not as veteran as Brother Ratib is, so excuse me if I have any faults. I'd like to start off with, first, I'm going to be talking about Ramadan and its benefits. Since Brother Ratib already talked about the basics of Islam, I'm going to be talking about just Ramadan since we're in this month anyway. Before I begin though, I'd like to get a raise of hands. How many of you have ever done some kind of like exercise workout that's lasted for maybe like 30 days, or maybe it's a diet that you had, like a diet plan or a detoxification plan? Has anybody done that before? Or at least you've heard of what I'm talking about? Okay, well this is what Ramadan is for us. It's a moment for us to be able to train ourselves to get the desired product of which we want to reach. You know, for example, if you want to do the Jillian 30-day shred, you intend to get toned by the end of it. Well, for Ramadan, you really want to get toned spiritually. That's the intent. But what's the point of Ramadan? What's the point of fasting? Why are we getting involved with this every year? We're doing the same thing over and over again. Well, it really goes back to the natural human inclination, and that's that we're very forgetful. Even in the Arabic language, we have the word insan, which means, or I should say, insan means people. The root word comes from nisyan, which means forget or forgetful. So we're naturally inclined to forget. And so we have Ramadan here. Every year it comes so that we can remember to go back to our Lord, go back and remember Him. And it's actually a really beautiful moment for all of us. It's kind of like what you would be more familiar with in terms of the New Year's resolution. You go to New Year's resolution, you're like, okay, I really want to fix this about myself, and you make your resolution, whatever it is. It's similar, except it's different because there's an actual application to it. You actually have to practice in attaining this. And if you've read articles on attaining good habits or breaking, bad habits, it takes about 21 days to do so. And that's why, Ramadan is actually a perfect conditioning for us so that we can attain that desirable product, whatever it is that we want to become. Sorry. I am a little nervous, I'm not going to lie. Okay, also, Ramadan is a time for us to really isolate ourselves. You know what I'm talking about when I say isolate ourselves. I mean take away all of your media networks and whatnot and all your gizmos and gadgets galore and put it away. Because what our problem is really, and Muslims, non-Muslims alike, is that we fill our heads with so many ideas and thoughts and things that really demand our attention that we aren't able to focus anymore. It brings me back to a chapter in the Quran, Surah Zumar, ayah 29, that talks about an example of a man there's one man who has a bunch of men that he's enslaved to. He's owned by and he's enslaved to. And then there's another man who is only owned by one. Now, this isn't actually talking about a man that's really enslaved. Rather, it's that your ideas are enslaving you. It demands your attention, and you have to do this. Okay, you hear the phone start ringing, and you feel inclined to answer it. No one said you have to answer it. You can be doing whatever you need to do, but this is our inclinations that we start getting distracted by all of these factors. Well, in Ramadan, we really want to be like the other man, or woman, who basically is able to control their desires and even control that distraction and be able to focus on one whatever it is, if it's a thought, or even in our case, we want to focus on God. Now the thing is, we're not all about isolation either. Even though this is good for us in terms of wanting to build ourselves, we need to isolate ourselves so that we can spiritually build ourselves. That's great. But God knows us. He knows our spiritual side. He also knows our natural side of we're social beings. We like to be with people. We like to talk. Some of us not so much, but a lot of us do. And so He has aspects in Ramadan for us that allows us to do that. For example, something called Taraweeh. Taraweeh is a prayer that we do after the last obligatory prayer of the day. And everybody comes together, old, young, children, baby, even the adults, they come pray. Now, we do have, kids programs for the kids, but it's aside from that, everybody is actually enjoying themselves, whether it's with prayer or they're seeing other people. They're actually telling each other, hey, this is where I've gotten in my reading of the Quran. This is how many prayers I was able to achieve. And you start helping each other grow, and you really grow as a community. And it's a really beautiful process and transition that we have. Now, another thing that I want to mention also is that you have to understand God knows us similar to that. If your teacher knows you, they're going to develop a program so that they can develop something that you can understand in your classroom so that you can be tested properly. Or, for example, a nutritionist. Okay, if you are having diet problems, and your nutritionist starts to understand you, and they know you very well. They figure out your diet, they figure out your plan, and they plan out the perfect thing for you. But what do you have to do to get the goal? You have to follow it, right? This is what God has allowed us to do with Ramadan. He's given us out a plan. This is the moment where you need to really push yourself to get the best results, the best you. And so we're able to do that by not just fasting with our limbs. We don't just fast with our foods. This is a misconception, unfortunately. Not just with non-Muslims, but with Muslims too. That we're also fasting. We're fasting actually with 3 factors.